Hi everyone, welcome back to DGMZ, Diwaan-e-Ghalib, Meri Subani. To all our returning viewers, we are very happy you could join us again. And to the new viewers, we are delighted you discovered the podcast and decided to tune in for the first time. Now, if you were with me in the previous episode, you know that currently we are going through Ghazal 33 from Diwan-e-Ghalib, Na tha kuchh to Khudaa tha. We've covered the first couplet. Today we are going to pick the second couplet. As always, I'm going to read the couplet first and then we will get into the keywords, key concepts and finally the DGMZ impression of the couplet. So, allow me to read the second couplet from Ghazal 33 from Diwan-e-Ghalib. हुआ जब गम से यूं बेहिस तो गम क्या सर के कटने का. हुआ जब गम से यूं बेहिस तो गम क्या सर के कटने का. ना होता गर जुदा तन से तो जानू पर धरा होता. Like we said in the first episode, this ghazal is very famous. Each verse is very famous. You must have heard these shares multiple times. They have been sung, they have been picturized in so many ways by so many people. So again, a great share today and let's start getting into it. So, let us do a quick approximate translation to kickstart this episode. First line, हुआ जब गम से यूं बेहिस तो गम क्या सर के कटने का. When being numbed by grief this way, why grieve on the head being cut off? Second line, ना होता गर जुदा तन से तो जानू पर धरा होता. Had it not been separated from the body, it would have been resting on the knees. So that's a quick approximate translation. Let's start picking our keywords. First word, gum. This is not the first time we are encountering this word at DGMZ. What it translates to is sorrow, grief, sadness, mourning, right? And of course in Urdu poetry, majority of the time these emotions are towards the beloved because of the unrequited love the lover is in. इस पे फैज़ अहमद फैज़ का ये शेर, कर रहा था गमे जहाँ का हिसाब आज तुम याद बेहिसाब आए. A lovely couplet. The approximate translation is, today I was sitting and counting the sorrows of the world, and today while doing that I remembered you unlimited times. And then John Elia का ये शेर, सारी दुनिया के गम हमारे हैं और सितम ये है कि हम तुम्हारे हैं. The approximate translation is, all the sorrows of the world belong to me, and the torture on top of that is that I belong to you. So that takes care of gum. Let's move on to the next word, a pivotal word in today's couplet, behis. Now it's a word complex. Be, as we know, is without. His is a Persian origin word which stands for feeling, sensation, sympathy. So when you say behis, it automatically means without feeling, insensitive, without sympathy, apathetic, right? Insensible. इस पे साहिर होशियारपुरी का ये शेर, बेहिस के तगाफुल का तो शिकवा बेसूद, पत्थर से पिघलने का तकाजा बेसूद. It's a nice one. The approximate translation is, from the insensitive one, complaining about negligence and indifference is of no use, fruitless. And then expecting from the stone to start melting, demanding a stone to start melting again is fruitless. फिराक गोरखपुरी का ये शेर, ना हो एहसास तो सारा जहां है बेहिस ओ मुर्दा, गुदाज़े दिल हो तो दुखती रगें मिलती हैं पत्थर में. So the approximate translation is that if you do not have feelings, if you do not have emotions, then the entire world will seem to be insensitive, devoid of emotion, apathetic and dead. But if your heart is soft, if your heart is pliable, if your heart is drenched in emotion, right, softened by emotion, then believe me, even in the stones, you will be able to see the painful veins emerge. Such is the power of emotion if it resides in your heart. If it is not there, then the entire universe is dead. But if it is there, you will see pain, nerves, even in the stones. So that takes care of Behis. Moving on to our next word, Zaanu. I don't think we have encountered this at DGMZ, so this would be the first time. Zaanu translates to knees or thighs or what we call the lap area, godi जिसे कहते हैं. And in Urdu poetry, we have many examples. Sometimes the poet is referring to the Zaanu of the beloved, sometimes the poet is referring to the Zaanu of the lover. So, the beloved Zaanu. कतील शिफाई का बहुत मशहूर शेर आपने एक गज़ल सुनी होगी, आखिरी हिचकी तेरे ज़ानू पे आए, मौत भी मैं शायराना चाहता हूँ. The approximate translation is, my last breath should happen in your lap. I want my death also to be poetic. By extension, the way my life has been poetic, I want my death also to be poetic. So the last breath should happen with my head in your lap. The lover Zaanu, इस पे अमीर मिनाई का ये शेर, इस तरह सोए हैं सर रख के मेरे जानू पर, अपनी सोई हुई किस्मत को जगा भी ना सकूं. The approximate translation is, such is the way she has kept her head in my lap and is sleeping that I feel so restricted that I can't even go ahead and wake up my destiny that is sleeping in my lap. I have to wait for her to wake up on her own. Can't wake her up. So that takes care of Zaanu, and that takes care of all our keywords. Let's start getting into the impression. First line. हुआ जब गम से यूं बेहिस तो गम क्या सर के कटने का. When being numbed by grief this way, why grieve on the head being cut off? Let's split it into two parts. First part, हुआ जब गम से यूं बेहिस. Gham indeed is the centerpiece of this couplet. Gham as in grief, sorrow, misery. Gham also is a topic Ghalib has detailed in his poetry in myriad of ways. Ghalib's comfort, familiarity, and deep understanding of this complex emotion is one of the many reasons that sets Ghalib's poetry apart from those who did not venture this deep into this dark, complex emotion of gham and sorrow. Now, gham is an emotion the lover in Urdu poetry is very familiar with. The lover in Urdu poetry is very familiar with sorrow, grief. शकील बदायूं का ये शेर, कभी तकदीर का मातम, कभी दुनिया का गिला, मंजिल इश्क में हर गाम पे रोना आया. What a lovely couplet. The approximate translation is, sometimes the lament of destiny and sometimes grievance towards the world. On my journey to the destination of love, on every step I cried. Now, usually this emotion of gham and sorrow and the associated pain lies deeply embedded in the heart of the lover. So much so that at times there is not even a single physical sign that would give away the lover's distress. In fact, the lover manages to project on the outside exactly opposite of what he is feeling inside. कैफी आज़मी की अगेन बहुत खूबसूरत गज़ल आपने सुनी होगी. इट्स अ फेमस सॉन्ग. तुम इतना जो मुस्कुरा रहे हो, क्या गम है जिसको छुपा रहे हो, आँखों में नमी हंसी लबों पर, क्या हाल है क्या दिखा रहे हो. Right? So the approximate translation is this excess of smiling that you are doing. What is the sorrow that you are trying to hide? There is wetness, there is moisture in your eyes, and there is a smile on your lips. What is your actual state, and what state are you putting forward for everyone to see? So, like I said, the lover in Urdu poetry, first of all, hides this grief deep inside of him, and sometimes will absolutely fool people by showing exactly the opposite of what he is feeling inside. In today's couplet, though, Ghalib details a scenario that is different. A scenario where grief and sorrow of the lover actually manifests physically on the outside and would be visible for people to see. Again, manifestation of grief physically was something Ghalib excelled at. He could describe grief physically and visibly in ways that were unimaginable. Today, though, Ghalib chooses a very simple way to describe grief on outside physically. And how does he do it? Physical posture. Human physical posture. And this posture is captured in Behis. So, what is Behis? Like we said, Behis is lack of sensation, lack of feeling, apathetic, numb, right? Behis is a Persian influenced phrase. As we know, Ghalib used a lot of Persian phrases, concepts, and words in his poetry. In Persian, the word hissi relates to the concept of feeling or sense or sensation, but it is generally used in its negative form, which is behis or behisi, which means senseless, without feeling, numb. Ghalib in the first part of the first line is talking about his head that is behis, by extension senseless, without feeling and numb. Now, the symbolism of the head throughout history is diverse, often representing head as the seat of the soul, intelligence and divine power, as well as themes of mortality, rebirth and authority. On a normal day, head of a human being symbolizes leadership, prominence because of its position at the top of the body. It also represents mental ability and intelligence. Therefore, when head is awake and functioning in its full capacity, head of a person is the command center for all he will think and do. Ghalib, however, here describes a head that is burdened and loaded with so many thoughts of sorrow and grief that it has completely lost its sense of purpose and balance. As a reader, you feel the heavy, dead weight of grief forcing this head down lower and lower, while continuously robbing this head of its alertness, awareness, and spark of life and wisdom. The lack of sensation has led to a heavy, dense, numb feeling that has pinned this head down and robbed it of its ability to maintain its prominent position at the top of the body. For all practical purposes, the head has stopped working, it has stopped thinking, it has stopped sensing. Ghalib, in the first part of this first line, has masterfully taken the already intense emotion of grief and further intensified it by combining it with the behis, which brings this physical posture into the visual. Hua jab gam se yu behis. When by grief it was rendered senseless, heavy, numb, then. So that takes care of the first part of the first line. Let's move on to the second part of the first line. Sorry. So second part of the first line, तो गम क्या सर के कटने का. Ghalib in the second part questions himself. Why would he feel sad or grieved if his behis, by extension numb, senseless, dead weight head was to be cut off? Why would he grieve cutting off a head that is behis? Before we go any further, we need to understand a background concept that is playing, right? As a lover in Urdu poetry, having his head cut off not by anyone or everyone, right, but specifically by the beloved, is a very common theme. Lover's head being cut off physically or metaphorically by the beloved is a very common theme. Sometimes the poets would get into the details which are very physical about actual cutting off of the head, and sometimes they will detail it as a metaphorical action. Usually the messaging behind it is very emotional, very metaphorical. मिक़दाद एहसान का ये शेर, एक तरफ सर काटने वाले लोग, एक तरफ बस तराने वाले लोग. Beautiful couplet. It talks about the beloved and the lover, right? So एक तरफ सर काटने वाले लोग. On one side there are people who only know how to cut heads, by extension beloveds, and एक तरफ बस तराने वाले लोग. And on the other side there are people who only know how to sing and write poetry, which is lovers. हसरत मोहानी का ये शेर, दिल खूं हो चुका है, जिगर हो चुका है खाक, बाकी हूँ मैं, मुझे भी कर ए तेग जन तमाम. The approximate translation is, the heart has already bled out and the liver has already turned to dust. Now there is only just me remaining, so O swordsman, by extension beloved, O swords woman, right? Kar mujhe bhi tamam, come and kill me also. Like I said, the lover, yes, they get slayed, they have their head cut off, but not by just anyone. It is specifically by the beloved. And then this last one, Ahmed Faraz ka शेर, मेरी तरह तूने शबे हिजरा नहीं काटी, मेरी तरह इस तेग पे कट कर नहीं देखा. Lovely couplet. Approximate translation is, like me, you have not been through the night of separation. Like me, you have not felt what it is to be cut on this sword, the sword of night of separation. So this cutting of head or cutting on the sword is a very, like I said, common theme in Urdu poetry and is playing in the background of this couplet, right? तो गम क्या सर के कटने का. So the lover is saying, if the head is behis, then why would I mind it being cut off, right? Ghalib rationalizes something specifically from a lover's perspective in a way that beats all rationale or logic. Ghalib in this first line shares the rationale that for a lover whose head is dead, numb, and burdened with grief so much that it has no sense or feeling left in it, for such a behis, numb head, why would the lover grieve if the beloved came and cut it off? True to his mastery, this rationale of Ghalib will make sense both physically and metaphorically. Physically, the numb and heavy head has totally lost all sensation and feeling, and hence, why grieve if it was to be cut off? After all, the lover would feel or sense nothing at all. The head is already numb, senseless, and without any feeling. Metaphorically, the numb and heavy head has lost all its ability to operate and function normally. Now it is just dead weight, and again, why grieve if it was to be cut off? After all, it was pretty useless when it wasn't cut off and attached to the body. So that takes care of the first line, हुआ जब गम से यूं बेहिस तो गम क्या सर के कटने का. Let's move on to the second line. ना होता गर जुदा तन से तो जानू पर धरा होता. Again, let's split it into two parts. First part, ना होता गर जुदा तन से. We saw Ghalib share the rationale in first line, which said that for a behis, numb, dead weight head burdened down with grief, why would there be any grieving or sadness if it was to be cut off? Now in the second line, we see Ghalib further rationalize this theme in an extraordinarily matter-of-fact way. In the second line, we will also see the famous Ghalib if and then logic play out. Now in the first part of the second line, we will see the if part of the logic. Na hota gar juda tan se, had it not been severed and separated from the body. Simply put, if it was not cut off and separated from the body. Let's move to the second part of the second line, which will give us the then part of the logic. To Zaanu par dhara hota, it would have been resting on the knees. So, in the second line, this is how the if and then logic plays. If it had not been separated from the body, then it would be lying on the knees or resting on the knees. Now, if you have been with DGMZ for a while, you know that we call Ghalib the Van Gogh of Urdu poetry. This second part of the second line is a good example of that. Ghalib paints for us in this second part of the second line a poignant, grief-drenched picture of a physical posture in vivid detail. The physical posture of a heavy head lowered down on the knees. Ghalib paints for us posture of despair. This posture is an innate human reaction to distress, offering a sense of self-protection and comfort. The posture sitting on the ground, drawing both knees up to the chest and often wrapping arms around them, is a universal, intuitive human body language for intense sorrow, vulnerability, and withdrawal from the world. This makes it a natural and powerful metaphor across many cultures and art forms, including painting and poetry. Ghalib leverages the metaphorical power of this posture for today's couplet. As we all know, Ghalib's Shairi incorporated many concepts, phrases, and idioms from Persian language, and this seems to be one of those instances. In Persian, there is an idiom or phrase we came across which probably, or something similar to it, plays in the background of the posture described by Ghalib in today's couplet. The Persian phrase we came across was Do Zaanu Gham Garefta. Excuse my pronunciation, Persian is not a language I'm exposed to at all. Do Zaanu Gham Garefta, which literally translates to taken captive by the sadness of both knees, or sitting with both knees in sadness, or hugging one's knees in sorrow. This is a poetic and idiomatic expression used to describe a state of deep sadness, profound sorrow, or being overwhelmed by grief. It evokes the image of a person sitting alone, hugging their knees to their chest in a state of silent, profound sorrow and helplessness. In English language too, there exists a similar phrase. It is called knees of sadness. Knees of sadness refers again to a physical posture of sitting with one's knees pulled to the chest, which is a common visual representation of sadness, despair, and emotional distress. Ghalib in this second line, in a matter-of-fact way, says that if this head had not been separated from the body by cutting it off, then it would be lying on the knees, dead and numb, in this pose, right, that we are talking about, knees of sadness. There are only two scenarios in Ghalib's couplet, the if scenario and the then scenario. There is no third option. Either extreme grief burdening the head into submission, where it gets lowered down and is placed on the knees, or the head being cut off by the beloved and hence ending lover's life. There is no third option. So that kind of takes care of Na hota gar juda tan se to Zaanu par Dharaa hota. As always, let's take a few minutes to look at the couplet in totality. First and foremost, this is a lovely visual share. Once you know all the keywords, meanings, and especially the symbolism behind them, the poignant picture emerges from the couplet and stays with you. The picture of posture of despair. Behis and Zaanu both play a critical part in the visual mastery of this couplet. In addition, Ghalib details lover's choice in the couplet, which is, as always, opposite to what a non-lover would make. Ghalib, the grief-struck lover, weighs his two options between, number one, heavy, burdened, lowered head on his knees in grief, or cut-off head separated from his body. For a non-lover, the choice would not be so difficult. One would choose the heavy, burdened lower head on the knees, since that is the option that will keep them alive, sad but alive. But Ghalib the lover questions and by extension answers that he sees no harm in choosing the option of getting the head cut off. Because if the head was not cut off, it would be hanging down heavy with grief on the knees. Ghalib here almost displays a clinical detachment of a surgeon towards an organ which is useless and is now just dead weight for the body. let's cut it off and give the body relief. So, like I said, the matter of fact way, the detachment, like the almost surgical detachment, clinical detachment towards this decision, right? That if the head is not serving me, if all it is going to do is hang down in grief, right? It is not serving any purpose. We went through all the functions and roles and responsibilities of the head, right? This head is not serving any of them. All it is doing is hanging down. And the more it gets grieved, the more deep it keeps going. Lower and lower it keeps going, right? Into the knees, right? So Ghalib says, might as well cut it off. It's serving no purpose. Now that is the second key aspect of this couplet, right? This choice, the lover's choice. The first one was the visual aspect. Now the last and the third one is this philosophy that Ghalib had, right? And we see that philosophy play throughout his poetry. And that philosophy was that the only way to get freed from grief is death. As long as you live, grief is part of that life. कह दे हयात व बंदो गम, असल में दोनों एक हैं. मौत से पहले आदमी गम से नजात पाए क्यों? One of Ghalib's favorite couplets. The translation is, the prison of life and the bondage of grief pretty much are the same thing. And that is why should you get any release from grief until you are released from life? Why would you get released from grief before death? Because after all, the prison of life and the bondage of grief are the same thing. उनका ये और शेर एक, गमे हस्ती का असद किससे हो जुज मर्ग इलाज, शमा हर रंग में जलती है सहर होते तक. For the grief of life, Asad, and Ghalib is referring to himself, what could be the cure except death? The candle has to burn on and on, no matter what condition it is in, till dawn arrives. And here, dawn is death, and the burning candle is life. So this was another philosophy that lies at the foundation of this couplet, that when Ghalib the lover is given a choice between a life fully burdened, fully loaded, fully drenched in grief and misery, and a choice between death, the lover will choose death. And that too, death at the hands of the beloved. If that could happen, then that just makes the deal even more sweeter, right? So that choice is driven by that philosophy that we see in Ghalib's poetry play out multiple times. All right, so that brings us to the end of हुआ जब गम से यूं बेहिस, तो गम क्या सर के कटने का, ना होता गर जुदा तन से, तो जानू पर धरा होता. We hope you enjoyed the impression. As always, we will be very keen to hear your feedback. Interact with us via the comments. Next time, we are going to pick up the third couplet, and that will finish the ghazal. Again, a short ghazal with 3 couplets only. Now, for our new viewers, a strong recommendation. Please access the episode titled Introduction to DGMZ, because that will give you a good insight into the motivation and inspiration behind this podcast. For our regular viewers, whenever you have time, please go to the homepage of the channel, surf through the playlist, pick up the episodes that interest you. If you have not joined us on Facebook, I would encourage you to do that and interact with us there. Now allow me to go ahead and close this episode by sending a lot of love and light to all you dear viewers, and thanks for watching.